This is part two of the birth of the Republican Party video. So just as a little recap, so we talk about the Kansas-Nebraska Act as being the pivotal moment where most people or most men are going to decide whether or not they're going to stay with the Democratic Party after Senator Douglas greatly disappointed a lot of Northerners. So it's the breaking point. But again, there were other reasons why people were leaving either the Whigs or the Free Soilers, or the Democrats. So just going back over that, it's not just this one act, but it's the overall growth of slavery and that alleged slaveocracy, so that bit of a paranoia that some of the Northerners are starting to feel. But again, to stay as a viable new party, they had to have more than just stopping the extension of slavery as being their one and only issue. Again, that was probably one of the Free Soilers' problems, is that they were pretty limited. So this is their overall key parts of their platform. So the free labor basically has to do with don't want to see any slavery to go into these new territories. Again, they're not about ending slavery permanently. Even Abe Lincoln never is going to say, I have the power to do that. That's why we have to go to the Civil War. To focus on industrial growth. They really see a very Hamiltonian view of the future, and that the future lies in industry. And they see the South is not achieving that because, again, they're putting all their money into cotton and soil and slaves. So they consider the South a somewhat backwards kind of economy. Funding for infrastructure. Again, they don't hesitate to encourage the federal government to invest not just in roads and canals, but now the up and coming railroad. And that will have a lot to do with where that transcontinental railroad line is going to go. Encourage the growth of farming in the West in terms of encouraging people to keep moving out to what we're going to call the Great Plains. And again, that is attractive to not only the free soiler, but also to the immigrants that are coming in and that will be coming in right after the Civil War. Ending the internal slave trade, again, hoping to at least put a cap on the growth of slavery and not allowing these slaves to be traded, as you'd say, down south. Limits on immigration. So as much as they want some immigrants to come, they want to put a cap on it, or they want to have some type of restrictions so that we're not going to be flooded with immigrants. Again, this is going to be part of that know-nothing attraction. So there's going to have to be finding a balance between encouraging that industrial growth, because who's working in those new factories, but for the most part immigrants, as well as the up-and-coming farmer heading out west, mostly immigrant stock. So this is going to be a bit of a balance for them. So the economic vision is important because, again, it just can't have about slavery. So they target the groups that were impacted the most by the market revolution. So again, going back to that industrial base. Knowing that infrastructure is key, because how are you going to link the East and the Midwest, and eventually in the Great Plains and out all the way towards California. They want a higher tariff. They don't like the fact that the tariff has been lowered. That's cut into some of the business profits. So some of the industrial leaders are also leaning towards the Republican Party. So they want to open up the Great Plains, which basically means the Homestead Act, which Abe Lincoln is going to pass while he is in the White House. The Democrats, as a rule, do not support the free labor issue. Again, they want to see the extension of slavery, and they also hesitate to see that the federal government is putting any money into infrastructure, and they're hesitant to encourage that overall industrial base. Social influences. This is, it somewhat overlaps, but not everybody's going to change their mind about their political party because of the economy. Some will have to do with what they believe is maybe morally right or morally wrong. So some of this could be part of the Second Great Awakening, but we talked about the reform movements and seeing that growth of the abolition movement. It's starting to seep into people's consciences. So they're looking for a party that is at least willing to take a stand. Again, that concern about the slave power, that there is some kind of conspiracy theory going on. The South feels the same way about the North. The book Uncle Tom's Cabin, which we'll talk a little bit about in class, but the power of that narrative to really relate the slave to the average white person who had never really seen a slave, and to make them human in this book and to give them emotion, this is what's going to stir a lot of people. The view that the South is overall repressive, so not just not just economically backward, but also culturally backward, that they are kind of stuck in a time warp of a very tight social hierarchy, that you don't see any social mobility, and that the way they treat their slaves is very paternalistic. And again, that fugitive slave law, that concern that if you could arrest someone who may or may not be a runaway slave, give them a trial, so to speak, in that they really don't have much of a trial. They can't bring anybody to argue for them. If that could happen to an alleged runaway slave, then it could probably happen to any other group or any other ethnicity that maybe the federal government didn't like at the time. So that's the overall concern with that. So I hope this helps. And again, taking notes from this is really important, and then trying to create those notes into some type of outline of how you would argue this type of question. All right, thanks. Bye.